Hey guys, welcome to the channel. So as promised, I got another car video for you here finally. So I'm at Kelvin's place and I just wanted to share with you his new project car. So we've already had a good look at his 67 Chevelle. This is a one of one 396 4-speed car. And I wanted to take this opportunity to kind of film this while these two cars were beside each other in the garage. This one's gonna leave soon. It's gonna go for its famous gold interior paint job, so it's going to be gone soon. So I thought I'd take this opportunity to do this while these two cars are here. So we know that this is a 67 Chevelle over here. Now this over here, very similar car, however it is not a Chevelle. This is a 67 Beaumont. Now, if you're from the States, you may not know what a Beaumont is. Now, this is basically a Chevelle with a little bit of a Pontiac flair to it. Now, they came with GM drivetrains. This one started life as a 327 4-speed car. It was black originally with a red interior. Today, it's got this white paint job on it. But anyway, there's some differences here. And some key things that make a Beaumont, and we'll go over that with you here. And Kelvin will explain some of this stuff to us. It's kind of an interesting story how the Beaumont came to be. So Kelvin, now one thing that's kind of impresses me now with both these cars, Kelvin's not afraid to tackle any type of a project. This car here. If you've watched the other video, this was a car that was used as a parts car for another project, and he wasn't scared to jump on this one and put it back in its original form the best he can. And this one over here, same kind of scenario. He's acquired enough parts to assemble a couple of these 67 Chevelles, and now the Beaumont is largely Chevelle, except for its exterior trim, its headlight buckets, its grille, its taillights. We'll show you some of that stuff. And its dash. The dash was basically a GTO dash. And that's what they look like in a Beaumont. Kind of different. Anyways, Kelvin, explain to us some of what makes a Beaumont a Beaumont.
Well, it kind of goes back to the early 60s. Then there was some competition between the US and Canadian auto manufacturers, and the Canadian auto manufacturers, GM even, they were having trouble selling cars in Canada because the US was more powerful in their marketing. So it was easier to get US cars. So the US or the Canadian government put huge tariffs on US built products, and insisted that vehicles sold in Canada would either be tariffed or they would have to have at least a certain amount of Canadian content. So where a plant like Oshawa, Ontario, for instance, compared with the way that they were manufactured in the States, where sub-assemblies would have been sent to most of the plants. There were a few plants that were super plants that would build everything and put them together, but the vast majority of them were just assembly plants. Whereas in Oshawa, they were building these cars. They had plants around that area that built frames, that built engines, that built all of the pieces and parts that went into it.
Did it all, yeah.
So my understanding is the body still came from Fisher in the US, but the rest of it was built and assembled in Canada. Then the U.S. cried foul. They were looking to find a better way, because if you've got a huge tariff on a U.S. built car, it's more difficult for them to sell cars here. So they made an agreement in around 1965 that was fully in effect by 1969, which basically just caused the end of the whole Beaumont and Acadian, which is another thing that you may or may not be aware of as a Canadian-only model. But what they were doing is Canadian-built cars had, well, primarily Chevrolet engines. We didn't use the Pontiac line, for instance. We had a Parisienne Custom Sport that had a small block Chevy in it. The Beaumont, unlike a Le Mans in the U.S., would have had a 326 or whatever, whereas they used a Chevrolet engine in the Beaumont. So many things about them had just these little twists of difference. Like, as you can see, Super Econo Flame. It's funny, even the 396s in Beaumonts were called Econo, let's see, Econo Thrust, I think, or Econo Jet, pardon me, was the big block version. Econo Jet. Yeah. It's hilarious. You could get a 350 horse 396 turbojet in a Chevelle, or you could get a 350 horse Econo Jet in a Beaumont. So cool. It's kind of humorous.
And this one's the Econo Flame.
And this was the Super Econo Flame. So basically, it was a 10-to-1. It had the as they call them, double bumper, camel hump, or whatever heads. They were the smaller valve, but it's a 4-barrel 327. And that's what the car had originally. And when I found out about this car, I thought, well, you know, it'd be kind of neat to put it back to the way that it was when it was new. Yeah. So, because it was kind of a cool car in its own right. I mean, originally the plan was to build an SD clone that would have been bookends with the Chevelle. I would have done them both in the same green color, which is a Canadian-only color. I would have done them both with a gold interior because it's so outlandish, I like it.
So when you mention SD, that would be the Sport Deluxe.
Sport Deluxe, not like the Super Duty as the U.S. Pontiacs might have been referred to. It was a Sport Deluxe. Anyway, it was just basically the very top line of the Beaumont line.
Like the SS and the Chevelle.
Yeah, exactly. The equivalent to the Super Sport. So the Beaumont came in a base model, then it came in a custom model. The custom was equivalent to the Chevelle Malibu. Okay? Yeah. This car started life as a Beaumont custom. Sport coupe. And I mean, you know, if you want to zero in on the cowl tag here, you'll notice some things about it. We'll look at the Chevelle one here shortly. So on this cowl tag, the model designation is a 73617, and anybody that's very familiar with Chevelles will know that they were a 13617.
Which would be a Malibu.
Which would be a Malibu Sport Coupe, or, you know. So this car, the thing that really interested me about it was that, as you can see, this OS, that stands for Oshawa Plant. These cowl tags are so much easier to read than the U.S. cowl tags. Version, yeah. And not only that, but Vintage Vehicle Services, it used to be part of GM, has so much information on them that you can get so easily. But this is what I really liked when I saw this. A lot of the RPOs, the special stuff, was put onto the cowl tag. So this one was A51, which is buckets, D55 console, and M20, signifying a wide ratio 4-speed. Right. Now, I was especially interested in that because if you look at the Chevelle one over here, and this is why I thought these make a good pair. So this one, as you can see, we couldn't see it in the last video, but this is a 13817, which is a genuine big block SS car, just by the model number, you know that right away. Again, the Oshawa build plant, a very odd paint code that most people will have never seen if it's a U.S., you know, someone from the U.S. looking, because this color was not available in the U.S., this JJ, or it's called Verde Green. There's the 784 that says it was gold interior. But along the bottom line here, again, with the RPO codes, A51, D55, M20, so bucket, console, 4-speed. And the two of them are identical in that respect with the exception of the paint color, the trim code, and the model. So had this been a Malibu, it would have been 13617. Yes. And that was 73617. So it's so close. They were just about identical in so many ways, even the upholstery patterns, the you know, everything about them, the door panels and everything were directly the same as Chevelle, whereas a lot of the other A-body models like Cutlass and Buick and the like had, and Pontiac Le Mans had different upholstery patterns than the Chevelle.
And both of these were made in the same plant.
Yes, they were.
Born in the same place.
They were made very close together, too. This one was made on March 20th of 1967. And this one was made the following month, April 19th of 67.
Oh, there you go, yeah.
So, you know, they were very close together, 1 month apart.
That's pretty neat.
So the other neat thing about this car, and the reason that I've decided to kind of put it back to the way that it was originally, is that it's the highest output small block that was available in Canada in a Beaumont. So that 275 horse, I know in the States you could get the L79, but we couldn't really get those in a Beaumont model here in Canada. So if you wanted a little bit more oomph than the 275 horse 327, you would have to go to an SD car to get the big block in it.
Right.
So these are like kind of big brother, little brother, where they're that close together in the respect that they have, you know, the highest horsepower small block and, well, unfortunately, the lowest horsepower big block, but, you know.
Yeah.
This car was also kind of neat because it had power steering and power brakes. I'm generally more of a high driver input guy. I like my cars to be, well, you got to manhandle them, you know. So
standard steering.
So that car, manual steering, manual brakes, manual transmission. This one, power steering, power brakes, but still a manual transmission. So it's okay.
Yeah.
But maybe my sweetheart will get more enjoyment out of driving this one than that because it wouldn't take as much arm.
She can drive this one, and you can drive that one.
Yeah.
Now you've gone through on this one. You can see out here all the chassis work is done, the steering work is done, the suspension work's all done. Good, nice, pretty looking engine in here, and yeah, he's done a lot of the hard part. And then now this body was just put on what, a week ago?
Well, not even a week ago. In fact, I set the body on this past Saturday, and this is being Wednesday. This body literally sat in a field, in a pasture, for about, I'm going to say, a decade or more.
Yeah, you can see it's still got its barnacles on there.
It's got plenty of barnacles. But the fact that these two-door bodies are getting so difficult to come by, you know, the price was right. I couldn't pass it up. It was a situation where either I rescued it or it ended up either getting crushed or ended up being, you know, somebody's science experiment or something and build something that it's not supposed to be. So.
And in its own right, a black exterior, red interior, 327 4-speed, kind of a sought-after car in its own original form.
Which is why I decided to go back to more original than the clone modified. I might still do some of the stuff on it that will make it more SD, because I like the side gills they had and various other things. But not necessary. I'll just do it to enjoy it.
And this is one thing I wanted to point out. Calvin's got, this is the Beaumont Taillight here on the 67 Beaumont. And we'll just go over to the Chevelle. He's got one taillight in the Chevelle here. So if you're familiar with Chevelles, this is your obvious 67 Chevelle taillight, the wraparound.
So another really bizarre thing about the Chevelle and the Beaumont, and in order to distinguish the models, in 1966, a Chevelle had a captured taillight that didn't wrap around the corner, but a 66 Beaumont did wrap around the corner. It was a narrower taillight in a 66, kind of like the Chevelle, but it wrapped around the corner. In 67, they reversed, where the Chevelle now had
a wraparound,
and the Beaumont had the enclosed one that was just inside the quarter that you couldn't see from the side.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a reversal just to make them more distinct, you know. Just as, say, a 68 Chevelle has a wraparound taillight that's narrow, the 69 has a larger taillight, whereas the Beaumonts had, in 68 and 9, they had a similar idea, but the one was divided by a reverse light, and the other one had 2 bars across it. So there was a considerable difference, again, in the taillights between the Chevelle and the Beaumont, as well as the grills. Now, we can't really show you the grill in here, but
I think you've got one up there.
That's a Beaumont
away.
grill. They were a heavy die-cast grill.
Yeah.
That had headlight bezels and doors that were all cast chrome parts. They were a lot heavier, but they were also a lot more robust. Whereas the Chevelle, most people are aware, was just a stamped aluminum grill that had various blacked out trim and what have you, depending on whether it was an SS or a Malibu. It had extra holes in it for an SS and stuff like that. But the Beaumont grills were the same for both the custom model, as this is the base model, and the SD. The difference was in how they were painted. So in some cases, kind of like the Chevelle SS, where there was additional black paint on the grill as well as different openings. The Beaumont SD grills were different again. The other thing was, well, in terms of the way they were finished. The other thing was on the rear panel of a Beaumont base model, it didn't have a great deal of trim. It did have the Beaumont lettering here, as the holes show, but on a custom like this car, it had a border trim that went all the way around, about 1/2 inch wide trim that outlined the back panel. They weren't blacked out like a Chevelle SS was, but on an SD, they had a wider trim, was a double line trim on the top and bottom that narrowed the panel. It was still body color, but it had a double trim. In fact, to kind of illustrate the difference, this, for instance, would be very similar to what an SD would have had. Now, this, some might recognize this as a piece from a square body Chevy truck, but this would have gone across here like this as a double trim with a C-shaped molding at the ends. So one along the top, one along the bottom on an SD. On a custom, it had just the narrower piece, the 1/2 inch wide or whatever that ran all the way around the border.
And I think they also had a little bit of extra trim on the side of the car. On the lower half, they had...
That's, never mind, that's fine. Used pieces.
I'm breaking his valuable Beaumont parts.
Those are spare parts.
The hard to find stuff. Now, one thing, I guess, now that I've knocked that taillight on the floor, I should mention these Beaumont parts. They're not reproduced. That's what makes this whole deal difficult. When you're restoring a Beaumont, the Chevelle itself, every piece and part can, be purchased. This stuff is reproduced. Whereas the Beaumont stuff, I hope I didn't break anything.
Oh, no, it was broken before. So, and we just put it on for display purpose, just so you know.
Describe it.
To show the difference between the two.
But that's what makes restoring these cars, or getting these cars back on the road in their original trim, in the way that what made it a Beaumont was all those trim pieces, and they are not reproduced, so it makes it really tricky to...
As an example, on a Beaumont Sport Deluxe, and this is where it gets totally confusing if I haven't got you already. A Sport Deluxe car had gills on the rear quarter between the door and the wheel opening. So there would have been 3 gills about here, in this area right here. Now, very similar to a Le Mans, okay? Except in the Le Mans, the panel is actually indented and has an insert in it. Whereas these were a completely external piece that went on to the side of the quarter panel. It gave that same feel like the gills like a Le Mans or GTO would have, but they were just an external trim piece to give it that flavor. But here's where it gets confusing. On a Beaumont Sport Deluxe, for instance, it would have had script on the rear quarter that said Sport Deluxe. Okay, those pieces are finally being reproed now, but if the car was ordered with a stripe package, they had a wide stripe that went along the bottom, and if it had that stripe, it didn't have the Sport Deluxe emblems, even though it was a Sport Deluxe, because it said SD in the trim.
Oh.
So yeah, it's funny. It's like, why wouldn't they put the emblem on and the stripe package? Because in a Chevelle, for instance, in an SS, the stripes were a part of the package. You could get a stripe delete, but more often, like as part of the package, it was supposed to have a stripe kit.
Right.
And it still said Super Sport on the rear quarter. So I think it was just a frugal Canadian thing where, well, if we're going to put that SD on that stripe, we're going to get rid of the Sport Deluxe on the rear quarter panel because it'll save us 3 cents per car or something. Who knows, right? But otherwise, yeah, there were other things. Sport Deluxe would have had lower rocker molding similar to an SS, whereas a Custom had 2 trim strips about 1/2 inch wide that went just at the body line and one above, about 2.5, 3 inches above, and they went the length of the car.
This one would have had.
This car would have had as being a custom, a Beaumont custom. Yeah. So again, like the Malibu, for instance, that had the single trim at the body line, whereas the Super Sport had a stripe package and a lower rocker molding. So, you know, they were very similar in so many respects. But the neat thing about them is, for instance, well, the GTO style dash, Le Mans GTO, whatever. Now, here's another thing that's, we'll get to it when we get around the cars. Both of these cars were U16 option cars, RPO U16, which, as some might know, is factory tachometer, which is something that I think is kind of a cool thing. So again, they are so comparable in another way, is that, you know, we've got a U16 factory tack. In the case of a Chevelle, it was a tack that hung down in front of the fuel gauge, and they called it a blinker tack. The reason they called it a blinker is because it obscured the signal indicator in the dash, so they moved it into the face of the tachometer. Oh. This car had a U16 factory blinker tack, and it's going back that way, of course, because I dig that kind of instrumentation. It's cool. But in a Le Mans or a GTO, in the States, the tachometer was different than a Beaumont had. Again, it's kind of a thrifty thing. So if you got a 66 or 67 Beaumont with a U16 RPO code or factory tack, it used the exact same tachometer that was used in the US 1964 GTO. Oh, wow. So the correct tack for a 66 or 67 Beaumont was the same tack as a 64 GTO. And that one was right in, so there was an actual hole in the... If you didn't order the tack, that hole was filled with a clock. So I've got a cluster put together. Well, there's one there we could actually look at. With the factory tack already installed, and that's a 64 GTO tachometer, which was correct for a Beaumont with the U16 RPO. Also, another neat thing about the car, it had the rear speaker control, and this car actually had another extremely rare option, which was a driver's door remote mirror, which I also have for the car. Oh, good. So it's going to go back on it, and it'll be kind of an interesting, it's all around kind of an interesting car in its own right. And that's why it's going to end up going back more or less the way it should be. It's going to take a lot longer because I got to finish the Chevelle first. But now, one thing about this car also, unique to it, is it's had some, you know, it's got maybe some race history. We're not really sure, but there's no evidence of a cage in here, but these wheel wells have been radiused massively to make room for some larger rubber. And there was a little bit of monkey work on the cowl as well. Yeah, I just stuck a piece in there. I'll pull it out so you can see. Somebody did a poor man's cowl induction setup, kind of like a you know, trying to get cold air into the intake. So you can see where there were screw holes where they attached a vent cowl thing, and then they had it hooked up as cold air induction. It's not very wide open. I did bend it back somewhat, and I do intend to repair it. Yeah. Because it's just, you know, kind of my thing. So I cut a chunk out of the car that gave up its life for the frame. It was a four-door sedan that was completely toast, Ontario car that had rotted
so
away.
you didn't kill nothing that was...
Yeah, not anything. And I did use every piece. There wasn't anything left when I was done. The body was falling apart. So...
Well, I do, you know, and I do, and a lot of people, I'm sure, appreciate the fact that you are saving on these. Like I said, these were actual parts cars.
Oh, yeah.
These cars were stripped beyond, all their goodies were gone, and Kelvin still took this on as a project, and he's saving on it. But yeah, this one's got kind of a neat story. Like I say, these wheel wells were really radiused. You can notice it, I don't know if I can get it in the camera here, but from one car to the other, you can really see the difference in
the distance from the body line to the wheel lip.
Yeah,
is so considerably greater on the Chevelle because it hasn't been modified.
And that guy there.
Yeah. So I'd say they were raised 2.5 inches or so, somewhere maybe even 3 inches.
So we don't have any history on this specific car. It would be kind of neat to know if anybody's actually seen one of these cars, or this specific car, this white 67 Beaumont running around. It would be nice to...
It also had evidence of a drive shaft loop in the past.
Right,
and although I just set a piece of floor on top, the tunnel had been cut out for, I'm guessing, probably a vertical gate shifter, because it had a hole in there that you could drop a basketball through. And being a factory 4-speed car, you know, I'm going to put a tunnel patch back in, and I'm going to put the proper hump into it and everything.
Yeah.
So
put it all back the way it was. But it was found with also a big block in it.
It was, and that's why it became a parts car. The guy was under the impression that it was actually a real SD because he didn't know what to look at for numbers. When he bought the car, he bought it to strip it, to use it for his 67 SS convertible as a donor. Because it had a proper date code 396, and it had a Muncie M20, and it had, you know, all the pieces, and even a 12-bolt, which, as an L30, which is what this engine designation was an L30, 275 horse 327. At a certain point in production, I believe around June, supposedly, they changed up to using Muncie's and 12-bolt differentials. But in the earlier production ones, they were using 10 bolts, as this one is, and a Saginaw 4-speed, which is all that I've put into this one because that's really all that I can afford. The 10 bolt and frame came from the 4-door donor car, which was a 6-cylinder Power Glide car.
Okay.
So I thought, well, it'll probably be okay. I'm not going to be racing the thing or beating it up particularly badly, so I'll just have to be a little ginger with the Saginaw because I know that I can break them quite easily. So
no, that you've done a really nice job here. All the front end is new, and yeah, it looks real pretty.
This car was actually originally an F40 heavy-duty suspension car as well. So being that this came from a Beaumont custom 4-door, it has the small diameter front stabilizer bar, whereas originally as an F40 heavy-duty suspension car, it would have had the larger stabilizer, the same as the Chevelle SS has, because it was also an F40 car.
Yeah.
But there were, you know, there are a lot of similarities. There are some very minor differences between the cars. One thing that a lot of people don't necessarily notice right away when trying to identify an original big block Chevelle, this is something you can look at. This brake line, so the way that it comes from across the cross member and way down the frame here and back up to the front wheel.
Yeah.
This was a big block only thing because in a small block car, they came up over the frame roughly here, which would be too close to the manifold, they felt, and it would overheat the brake line. So if you look at this one, this is a homemade brake line that I've made, but it more you know, it represents how it would have been done from the factory, where it comes across right here. Now, if it were a big block, it would be considerably closer there, and they felt that that was a heating issue.
Yeah.
So big block Chevelles, if they've got the original steel brake line, it'll be routed back along the frame like that. There were interesting and unique differences that a lot of people may or may not be aware of. Things like, for instance, the steering columns. If you look at these two cars, you can see that from the steering box, the end of the steering box input shaft, this being just a manual box, from here to the opening in the firewall where the column would have come through is a bit problematic. When these cars were going down the production line, they would have the column installed in the body. And as they set it on the frame, the steering shaft of the column wouldn't fit through between the manifold and the suspension. So
Yeah,
what they did is they made, for big block cars, because of the diminished space, they had a rag joint with a splined end that clamped, and the end of the column was splined. So they could position it, line up the spline, and lock it down with a bolt.
Ah.
Whereas on a Malibu or a small block, any small block car, the end of the column was actually swedged or welded to the end of the column. So when they bring them together, there was enough room for that, for the rag joint portion to slide in and get past the manifold on a small block.
Big block was a little tighter, so...
So again, that's another thing to look for to verify a genuine 138 or SS car, is does it have a spline on the end of the steering column shaft? Because tilt columns did have, but that was so that you could take them apart to service them. But a non-tilt column was specific to a big block car in that it had a spline on the end instead of a swedged flange that went onto the rag joint.
Oh, okay.
So that's a couple of the things that are very distinctive between a big block and a small block car, if you're trying to identify them after the fact, after they've been modified or whatever. Number one, I guess everybody just need to look at the serial number or the body number and make sure that it's a 138 if you're looking for an SS car, or a 136 if it's a Malibu. And I mean, you know, they all have value, but the big block car is always going to have a little bit more of a presence, as it were, if it's an original, you know.
So those are good ways to identify the two.
This car was kind of interesting too. When it's never had any panel replacement because the car was completely disassembled as a parts car per se by 1976, when it was only a 9-year-old car.
Yeah, early in its life.
So, and I found no sign of any case where they had replaced a rocker panel, but interestingly enough, Fisher Body, when they were building this body, one of the rockers is stamped with 138 and the other is stamped with 136. There is no difference between the two, just that in places like around the trunk opening and the like in the drip channel, it's a 138, but only one of these rockers was a 138. So that particular day they put this body together, they didn't have any more that were stamped 138.